I am here with you as Anna Jessup. I am one of the SUD clinical analysts here at OCHN on the SUD team, and I help with the community workshops organizations and presenting with them. So today's presentation is Addiction in the Brain. This is presented by McKenna Wilson, who's with Henry Ford Eastwood, and we're excited to have her start here very shortly. In the meantime, real quick, overview. Make sure again your mics are muted during the presentation. Because of the amount of content, we are asking that all questions be held at the end or place them in the chat, and I will make sure to let McKenna know when there are questions during the natural pauses in the presentation. Please make sure that again mics are muted. We don't hear some background noise. We've been hearing some conversations and things. So I don't know if you want us to hear those. Just make sure your mic is muted. And then your camera is not required to be on, but it is encouraged so we know who is here with us today. Uh, there is 1.5 McBAP specific CEUs that are available for full attendance during this presentation, as long as the evaluation is completed at the end. At the end of the presentation, we will give that link to you for the evaluation in the chat, and I will also email that out as well for those of you who may not have access to the chat. And that link will be open until 12 tomorrow. In the meantime, we will get started here as I believe we went over everything. And we will also be announcing the upcoming SUD workshops as well. But we'll save that till the end. So in the meantime, I am going to pass the torch over to McKenna and let her begin. So everyone, let's welcome McKenna.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for attending. Really quick, just want to make sure, can everybody see it? Cool. Good. Okay.
Yes,
awesome.
We can.
Great. Thank you. So like Anna said, my name's McKenna, and I'm here to present about addiction in the brain. I do want this to be conversational and open because I love this. And I think that it's important that we all understand the role that our brains play in addiction and ultimately to better serve our community. So I hope everyone can kind of get something out of this and gain some information. Okay. So just quick review of the objectives. I think everybody saw these on the flyer. First, learn about neurobiological structures and chemical pathways involved in pleasure and reward responses. Second, understand how these pleasure and reward responses function differently in the addicted brain and how this impacts treatment and overall recovery. And then third, we'll discuss clinical implications of these neurobiological underpinnings as we use evidence-based practices in our community. So before we get into the depths of information, I kind of just want to take a second to pause and reflect and think about what is addiction. If anybody wants to type some ideas in the chat, I'll shout them out as they come in. But what is it? What is addiction? Yeah, overwhelming desire to use something to change our mood. I like that. Thank you. I think it oftentimes, yeah, a disease. Oftentimes we understand it as something that takes over someone's life. But I think that, what we see is people addicted to substances, right? And so I think it's important to think about what we are addicted to. We tend to have a liking for multitasking, social media, our phones, constantly doing more than one thing at once. I've been guilty of this, of going to trainings and, it's a great time to be in training and also catch up on my notes and make sure I put in that authorization and do my laundry list of tasks. But I think that kind of speaks to what it is that we're missing as it relates to the brain and addiction. And so for this, I kind of want to try something. I want to challenge everybody to see and notice what it feels like to set aside the need to multitask and the need to attend to a gazillion things at once, and instead just be present and look at what we're learning about today. So with that being said, I want to get into the background of what we're talking about. And thank you everybody for participating in the chat there. So first thing, substance use disorders, right? That's how we understand them, how we know them, but also addiction. Um, so how do we as clinicians or mental health practitioners, whatever capacity you're working in the field, how do you diagnose these things? How do we know that somebody needs addiction treatment? What do we look for? Go ahead, type it in the chat, please. Yeah, self-report. So someone's saying, "Oh yeah, I'm drinking every day," or whatever it is. Um, okay. Ultimately, we look at behavior. We look at how is this person's behavior impacting, yeah, change in behavior, impacting manageability of life, inability to stop despite consequences. Think about when we look at those 11 criteria of a substance use disorder. 9 of those include some type of behavior. And sometimes we see behavior as somebody's identity, as how somebody is, who somebody is, what they're choosing to do. This is kind of where we get stigma, right? Yeah, I see all these. How long, how often, impact, tolerance, withdrawal. Yeah, awesome. Thanks, guys. I can send that, Pam. Um, but yeah, really, addiction has been kind of understood as this thing that people do and not really something that has been altered at maybe a more basic or biological level. And so this new way to understand is the disease model. Um, so early as 2003 and earlier, but this was just the most notable article written, is by a psychologist, Leshner, Addiction as a Brain Disease. Um, Basically saying that, yes, something isn't right at the biological level. Something changes in a person's brain to make it so that they can't live without this substance. That same article was reviewed in 2021 and basically found, yeah, it still matters. People often argue the fact that addiction is a brain disease because there's a concern that it takes away personal responsibility. Um, Basically, people can use the brain to put all the blame of every consequence the addiction has created in their lives. Like, oh, it's not my fault, it's my brain. My brain is sick. But that's not necessarily what it's doing, and we're going to talk about that. So we have these two sides of, oh, yep, it's a disease, it's the brain, and then the other side of, well, is it willpower? Is it choice? Is it all these behavior choices and wanting to live that lifestyle? So it's like, well, what do we do now? Well, ultimately, it's been found that the brain plays an undeniable role in addiction. No matter what, the brain plays a role, like I was saying. So, getting into the neuroscience, let's get cellular. This is for really just talking about how our brain is communicating, how our brain is responding. Base level, our neurological tissue, this stuff that makes up our brains, made of neurons. Neurons are cells of the brain. Neurons send and receive messages carried by neurotransmitters. Neurotransmitters are chemicals that basically carry that message. So think of it as a neuron being like your cell phone and a neurotransmitter being a text message. It's important to remember that neurons are specific to the structure they comprise, and so they send and receive neurotransmitters specific to that structure's function. So whatever structure in the brain we're looking at that has a specific function, it has a specific neuron that sends a specific message from place to place. Everything is very aligned in that way. Some of these neurons hold dopamine. The place they hold it is here in this synapse at the bottom, kind of on the left. Um, and so dopamine is really what we're going to be looking at. Yes, I see someone put dopamine, the pleasure and reward. Absolutely. Um, we're really going to be looking at the pathway that follows, specifically the pleasure and reward pathway. So bear with me. Going over structures and chemicals involved here. So first things first, we're looking at the limbic system. The limbic system is where that pleasure and reward system lives. Notice how it's kind of at the core of the brain, as well as moving closer to maybe outer brain, I'll call it. So um, specifically, the pleasure and reward system is called the mesolimbic system, but ultimately we're just going to say pleasure and reward because it's easier. So this pathway, first and foremost, is in our brains to help us learn what we need to do to survive. It helps us learn behaviors that make us feel good so that we can get through life. Um, Responsible for emotional processing and regulation, behavior management, motivation, and memory forming. Structures we're specifically talking about. The ventral tegmental area, that's that white dot in the middle, that is where dopamine is produced and therefore released. Nucleus accumbens is the pleasure center itself. It's called this because that is the spot where it's no longer just the chemical dopamine, it's also the feeling of the chemical dopamine. It's where chemical turns physical. Amygdala houses our emotional responses to dopamine. The hippocampus helps us form memories with that dopamine to know, like, oh, I remember doing this and it felt good. I want to do it again. And then the prefrontal cortex is where our higher order or kind of executive functions, is what we would call it, um, live. That's things like decision making, impulse control, planning, and we'll talk more about that later. And then neurotransmitters are those chemical messages of importance here, include dopamine, like I was saying. We're also going to look at the roles of glutamate and GABA, and then other important chemicals of note are serotonin, oxytocin, and endorphins. And we'll talk all about their functions as well. So let's just kind of dig into how does this system start, what happens, um, and it starts in that white dot in the center of the brain, that ventral tegmental area. So remember, our brains are wired to use feelings of pleasure to learn beneficial behaviors and help us survive. This is why we know to eat, why we know to drink water, why we know I need to go to sleep, things like that. And so the pathway begins when some stimulus that feels good activates that VTA, where dopamine is produced and ultimately released. So example, you're in a room full of these cute puppies. Aw, cute. And so um, we pet the puppies, and right away we're triggering this VTA right here, that little purple dot in the center of the brain there. So dopamine is being released, and that's where this whole thing starts. So the next stop, nucleus accumbens. Remember, this is the pleasure center. This is where chemical becomes physical. So this is how we feel the sensation of pleasure. This is how we know, oh, this feels good. This is making me feel happy. This is giving me a sense of reward. Um, Hence the fireworks. It's like that, aha, oh yeah, this feels good. After the nucleus accumbens, actually not after, this all kind of happens at the same time. But notice we saw how close all these structures were together. So the nucleus accumbens is wired within amygdala and hippocampus in the brain. So they are also receiving dopamine. When the amygdala receives dopamine, we see the emotional experience. So not only does it feel good physically, but we're also feeling I feel safe. Maybe I feel comfort. I feel like euphoric. This is good. Not just the physical sensation, but the emotional experience of it. Hippocampus is where memories are formed of the pleasure associated with the original stimulus. So this is where we'd be like, oh, I remember I pet a puppy before and it felt really good. I want to pet more puppies. That's kind of where we can look at the conditioning side of things if we take a behavioral approach of like when you do something, receive positive reinforcement of some kind, you want to keep doing it. And then another landing pad, and quite frankly, our area of interest is the prefrontal cortex. This is where the stimulus is connected to the feeling of pleasure and reward. This is where we consciously recognize that, oh, puppies are cute and I get to pet them and it feels good. I'm connecting. Puppies, good. It's linked. It's what helps us then decide to continue to pet puppies, or maybe they don't interest me because it didn't feel good. It's also the structure that's important for executive functions. So, like I was saying, decision making, planning, and impulse control. So just keep in mind that when communication in the pleasure and reward system is off, the prefrontal cortex is not functioning in the way that it's supposed to. So we see executive dysfunction. Just keep that in mind. We'll talk more about it in a few. Important to know that dopamine doesn't act alone. We also have to look at glutamate and GABA. Glutamate is an excitatory neurotransmitter. It moderates dopamine secretion. We can't just have dopamine running wild, right? We need some stuff in place to make sure that it's going where it needs to go, doing what it needs to do. And so basically the way I understand glutamate is like a teacher and kids waiting for recess. So kids are all excited. The kids are the dopamine, ready and raring to go. We want to go to recess. And the teacher's like, hang on, not recess time. Okay, yes, it's recess time. Open the door, go play. On the opposite end is GABA. GABA is inhibitory. So meaning it basically tells everyone in your brain, all the structures, okay, calm down. We're not really going to react to all this dopamine. We're going to chill. It's produced by glutamate. And like it says here, it's so we don't overreact to dopamine. So using this same analogy, GABA would be like a teacher kind of calming down students in class. Like, hey, listen up. We got to be calm. It's not recess right now. And then those other chemicals that I was talking about, serotonin is also kind of a regulatory role. It helps us stabilize mood and then also regulate sleep. Serotonin has an inverse relationship with dopamine. Keep that in mind. Oxytocin is that cuddle hormone, gives us feelings of trust, bonding, connectedness. And then endorphins, brief bursts of euphoria, naturally numbs or dulls pain, helps with stress and anxiety, things like that. And so we're talking about this in terms of a non-addicted brain, right? But we need to look at the addicted brain. That's why we're here. So when we do that, we have to look at it in terms of a person is introducing chemicals that cause unnatural production, secretion, and response of and to dopamine. So what does this mean? Like it says here, it's all about the dopamine. And remember, we want to look at this in terms of addicted brain, like I was saying. So dopamine gives us feelings of pleasure, reward, euphoria. It's also where we get motivation. It's where we receive kind of the message to, hey, get up, get going, and do this because you know it's going to help you feel good. So looking at this slide again, really want to take in terms of now that we're knowing we're talking about dopamine. Go to the next one. We kind of zoom into that synapse there. This space in the middle between a receptor and like a sender, or the neuron that's sending it, the dopamine, it basically gets flooded because when a person uses a substance, it releases 10 times more dopamine from that ventral tegmental area. So it kind of floods the pleasure and reward system. It's why a person feels rewarding or pleasurable experiences of intoxication quickly. So think about how we hear our clients say, I've never felt that good. I've never experienced the feeling I got again. Or I can't find this without heroin in this example here, or alcohol, whatever it is. Well, yeah, it's because it's flooding an unnatural amount. And so this is where we get into chronic use, tolerance. So basically, when a person is using over and over and over, constantly flooding that system, it maxes out the brain's ability to use dopamine for pleasure and reward responses. Communication gets confusing. It's almost like there's this massive traffic jam and we don't know where to go because it's like, oh, what the heck? So the brain adapts. That's what's interesting about the brain is it does change, it does adapt, it does figure out how to keep working in order to survive. So the way that it adapts in this addicted brain situation is by changing how much substance is needed to trigger dopamine release, meaning you need more of the substance to actually trigger that ventral tegmental area, that little dot in the middle of the brain, to say, hey, we're going to release dopamine into this pleasure and reward system. That's where we get, right, needing to use more of the substance to feel the effect. The brain also kind of weeds out or shuts off dopamine receptors to try and balance the flooding. Because if there's less receptors, that means there's less response, less reaction needed. So, like I said, person needs more of the substance to feel intoxicated because there's less receptors. The high isn't the same. So, think about clients who have said, "Oh, I have just been chasing the first high, and I can't find it." Um, so remember, the purpose of this pathway is so we can learn survival. So with chronic use, means of survival starts to change. And so let's think about those structures that I showed a couple slides ago with the picture of the brain. Um, like I said, we use this for survival. Dopamine is what triggers the pleasure and reward structures to function. And so when we have an overload, it means the structures are kind of working like they never have before. Um, because there's that overflow, the feelings, well, not feelings, but for some people, but the messages being sent are that much more intense. Um, and why memories of knowing, oh, this helped me feel good, I'm going to keep doing it, are so strong because there is this influx of dopamine. And so that's why the emotional experience of substance use is so strong, why connection between pleasure and the stimulus happens so quickly, and why memories of the substance use and the feelings it brings people are that much stronger than other rewarding behaviors. So, biggest takeaway here is we want to look at active addiction when someone comes to a treatment center. In active addiction, the pathways that have been flooded over and over and over again by dopamine are solidified. They become a means of survival. The brain has learned to communicate in a way to stay alive with this flood of dopamine. Therefore, it needs that flood of dopamine to survive. So, biggest takeaway, this is a means of survival. It's no longer about having dopamine to feel reward and pleasure. It's about having that level of dopamine just to survive. And so, looking back at this picture, um, these are the structures we're talking about. Think about how emotional responses are impacted by chronic use. Like I said, it's that feeling of needing to survive, right? This is really just to show the picture of the brain. Basically, these are the structures that are being impacted. Those other chemicals I was talking about, glutamate and GABA. So glutamate and dopamine work together. So when dopamine floods, glutamate does as well, meaning that neurons are like always excited. We can't really calm down. Um, and then glutamate is being used up, so it can't turn into GABA. It can't produce GABA. So we have less GABA, meaning we don't have that, okay, stop, you're overreacting chemical. It can result in more anxiety, not being able to calm down. Yeah, things like anxiety, right? That hangover anxiety, have a lot to do with changes in GABA. Serotonin depletes because we saw that inverse relationship. When we don't have serotonin, we don't have emotional regulation. We're having high highs, low lows, mood swings, sleep problems. Oxytocin and endorphins also both decrease with active addiction. A lot of this has to do with behaviors that come with active addiction. So this comes with difficulty trusting others, more anxious, not being able to manage stress. So what happens when a person stops using? I've heard from my own clients, when I stop, I feel like I'm dying. Yeah, that is probably what it feels like, because think about it. It became a means of survival. Taking away someone's means of survival means they're going to feel like they're dying, right? So, along with the typical withdrawal symptoms we see depending on what substance a person is using, a lot is going on emotionally. I lost my best friend. My means of survival is gone. How am I going to get through the day? The thing that helped me feel stable is gone. So, what about our best friend dopamine? What happens when someone stops using? Dopamine basically goes down the toilet, right? Because we're not flooding anymore. We got so used to that flood that when it's taken away, the natural amount we have is not enough. This results in loss of motivation and drive, and we can't really activate those higher level thought processes in that prefrontal cortex because of it. And that's where we come in. This is where we want to target. How can we help someone overcome this dopamine depletion to find motivation, to find a want to change behavior? We can say till we're blue in the face, do this, do this, do this. But if someone feels like they don't want to, if they're not motivated to do it, they're not gonna. And when you feel like your means of survival is taken away, it makes it that much harder to want to be motivated. Um, so in the chat, um, want to hear what types of things do we work on with our SUD clients? What do we work on? Yeah, treatment plans. What's in those treatment plans? Identifying triggers. Yep, that's a good one. So identifying triggers is almost looking at identifying the memories that have been formed that linked substance is good, I want to use it. Right? Creating positive emotion regulation. Yeah. All of these things have really gone away. Yeah. All kinds of good stuff. Um, One thing I was really stages of change. Where do we get stages of change? Where do we really use that? Anyone know? At least how I learned. So basically, what everybody has been saying is right targeting the prefrontal cortex and its capabilities by looking at choosing healthier activities, creating goals and carrying them out. That's planning. Planning is one of those functions. But what I was really thinking is motivational interviewing. How much of our jobs is motivational interviewing? How do we get people to talk about, oh, yeah, there is a problem. Oh, I do need to change. Oh, well, how do I change? How do I find the motivation to do so when the thing that gave me motivation is gone? Yeah, everything. Yeah, I find a lot of what we do starts with motivational interviewing, right? How we get people thinking, oh, I need to find motivation in other ways. for sure. Um, so along with motivational interviewing with practices we do, looking at people's values, building that discrepancy to kind of break through some ambivalence, maybe find other ways that we can be motivated. We also can't ignore the fact that brain is still coming back. That depletion is still there and the brain is normalizing. And so as the brain is normalizing, we want to kind of help out by introducing healthier, safer habits, healthier, safer skills to maybe boost dopamine naturally. Kind of relearning the natural process of the pleasure and reward system. I kind of saw a lot of ideas here. Yeah, I love it. Education was one of the methods I saw. Triggers, relapse prevention, communication, a lot of psychoeducation in our jobs for sure. Um, so, like I was saying, we also can boost this dopamine naturally. And I think Gwendolyn asked a good question too of how going to meetings or having behavior change in general kind of helps normalize some of these neurotransmitters like dopamine. And so, some natural dopamine boosters that we find include meditation, making to do lists, checking off tasks, goal setting. Someone said, when we treatment plan, what are we doing? Setting goals with our people. Regular exercise, getting out, going for a walk, get your body moving. Um, Creative approaches. So, research has shown when someone creates something, it does release dopamine, even if it sucks. So even if clients are resistant to, I don't want to collage today, I don't want to do this today. Well, even if it's bad, the act of creating something helps activate that pleasure and reward system in a natural way. And then also foods rich in L-tyrosine. That's an amino acid. It's a precursor to dopamine. Um, some of those foods include like dark leafy greens, nuts, things like, healthy stuff. um, and then the other chemicals that we were talking about earlier. So this was actually, I think, um, a question. Yeah, disconnection of addiction inhibits serotonin. Behaviorally, does going to meetings and getting connected to people help us get more serotonin and oxytocin? Yes, short answer. But other ways we can boost serotonin naturally include exercise, massage therapy, or basically anything somatic, more like connecting mind and body. Sunlight, really, that's getting at vitamin D. Oxytocin, right here, recovery community, importance of establishing connection and support. Um, so we encourage our clients to get to a meeting, to attend groups, to go to IOP, to do what they need to do. We say, this is what you need to do. Part of the reason why is so that we can boost these natural feel good chemicals to kind of help alleviate some of the tension that is felt when dopamine depletes. Also, pet therapy. We have a therapy dog here, and I think it's awesome because that does help release oxytocin. It does boost people's moods, help you feel good. And then last is endorphins. The physical movement, exercise, laughing or crying can release endorphins. Meditation. Yeah, a lot of meditation has impacts on more than just dopamine. It does change the brain. Um, so big picture, just kind of want to hear from you guys of what did we learn? How can we use this information to inform practices? And then just questions, comments, anything. Um, yeah, I see attend meetings, having a therapy dog, there's a big difference. But yeah, and then last slide is references, but I think everybody has access to the PowerPoints. If you wanted to look further into any of those things, please do. Um, But I am gonna stop sharing my screen so we can kind of just take the last couple minutes here and talk about it. Questions, comments, concerns. I see a question from Pam. Does goal setting actually boost dopamine, or is it achieving goals that boost dopamine? Both. But yes, setting goals, looking at what you actually want to do. I mean, think about when you write a goal down and you look at it, helps you feel motivated to do it. Um, that feeling of, okay, I want to do this is dopamine, right? So we can, you can feel free to unmute if you have questions. You don't need to put it in the chat unless you don't want to talk. That's okay.
One of the things that I never understood before was how glutamate and GABA, like the actual role of tolerance. And I always knew when people got clean, okay, they struggled to find joy and happiness, but I didn't understand that that was because their their brain is literally saying, no, you need a higher threshold to release dopamine, and and that it takes some time to reset that. So it just makes me kind of think about things in a new sense of, okay, in early recovery, how are we helping people survive that period of time and reset their brains and find joy in the little things? I don't know that we've always done that very well in this field.
Because
Yeah,
I don't know if you can so much. I'm not trying to interrupt, but like the realistic, right? Realistically, is you can try, right? And when we were talking about stages of change and motivational interviewing, we're also talking about how long does it really take in the sense of the brain to actually heal. We know with certain drugs why relapse is so prevalent and high, because the brain doesn't have enough time, and because they don't have that capacity for to actually, right, you can have all these things in place, and the brain is so powerful, and I think that we can help them more by explaining some of these, whether it works or not, it may take several tries, and the longer length they have to, you can't just have gratitude today. It is, we all know in this field how intense and how long that it takes, and how many times it may take for them to be able to achieve sobriety or recovery. It may take several attempts. It's a long process. And the comorbidities as well. And not recognizing what else is going on with their substance abuse, that led them there. We all know that. It's a lot of things working together. That's why it's so difficult.
absolutely. And I think it's important to look at specifically what are we doing to target that prefrontal cortex? What are we doing to strengthen the skills that have been depleted by this constant dopamine flooding? So I can go back to the slide if we need to see it, but basically the prefrontal cortex functions we're talking about are the decision making skills, um, the impulse control, planning ahead, task management, and task initiation, actually getting started on doing something. So, in our field, in our own practice, what types of things have we done or can we do to help bring about those practices?
I think meditation has been shown to really develop that prefrontal cortex, so that's why we include it every morning at Eastwood Recovery Center, to try and rebuild that skill set, but it's hard.
Yeah. How do we get people to buy in? That's my biggest struggle is, like, I think it was, is it Leanne? Yeah, sorry, was saying it's hard. Like, it often takes more than one treatment episode. We know that. when someone's on their 18th admission and they're like, I've done all this before. Yeah, I know all of this. I'm not meditating. It doesn't work. How do we get the buy-in?
We can give them rewards like contingency management. I mean, I think that's why that works.
Absolutely. Retraining that pleasure and reward system of, okay, I do good, I get good.
Even if it's a small thing like a sticker, you know, whatever that reward is, it's saying, hey, I did something good. I get a little bit of feel good, even though I might not get the dopamine flood.
Yeah, retraining the brain. Journaling, for sure. I had a question. So thinking about addiction in terms of a brain disease, I'm thinking about the first slide I showed where we kind of saw a shift in, okay, addiction is behavioral, it's all choice, it's a moral issue or disease of willpower, compared to addiction as a brain disease. How do we kind of balance the two, right? We know the brain plays a role, but we also know so does behavior, so does therapy, so does, our jobs. Is there a concern that it's taking away personal responsibility?
I think one of the things that I've often seen, I go to 12-step meetings, and people are of one of two mindsets. Either, hey, welcome back, keep coming, or kind of, what did you do wrong that you relapsed? And I've seen both, but I think that stigma of like, I must have been doing something wrong in recovery in order to have relapsed, instead of understanding it that no, there is this really, really strong chemical pull that tells me I need substances more than life, that makes it very difficult to stay in recovery. And so just kind of that idea of like, how do we educate people more about the brain, the role that it takes, and we're still responsible for picking up that first one. But the sometimes I mean, it's both. It's what you said at the beginning. It's both.
I like the way, rest in peace, Matthew Perry. He was in a debate with someone. I should say it wasn't a debate, but it was a healthy education, I think, conversation from his perspective. A news anchor, or journalist, or someone asked him about that, the disease model for him or choice. And he said for him, he viewed it as that first drink was his choice because he knew for him the consequence. But after that, that's when the chemicals take over. And that's where it's no longer becomes a choice because that's where the flood takes over, the chemical change processes come over. And now it's no longer him saying, yes, I am choosing to continue. It's that brain now power taking over. So I just like the way he kind of described that for someone who was trying to push onto him all willpower, all choice, all the things and argue with him of the disease model. I like the way he explained that.
Another thing I wanted to mention, anybody know, when is the prefrontal cortex fully developed? When is it at its peak function? Yeah, 25, 26. Yep,
26.
somewhere around there. When typically do we hear our clients' first use?
12, 13.
Teens.
I've heard 5. So think about The prefrontal cortex is still learning how to even respond to dopamine in the first place. And then all of a sudden it's slammed with it. You're going to have a lot of dysfunction there. So this is where we can also look at what have you gone through in your life? What behaviors can we look at and say, this is where your prefrontal cortex was being dysfunctional. Your decision making was impaired. Teenagers already have impaired decision making, right? And then you add some substances to the mix and oh, okay. Not great. I really like what Tom put in here. As someone in recovery, I celebrate small accomplishments daily. Also have clients do the same. Allows us to get that positive dopamine back. Absolutely. Recognizing good things that happen outside of your substance use.
My sponsor always called that the ta-da list, and you have to use the jazz hands.
Yeah, as often as we look at triggers, it's also important that we look at glimmers. That's what I've said it to people of like, okay, we have your triggers list. We get it. We know that driving down that road or calling this person or, you know, I don't know, whatever it is that triggers them, feeling a certain way. Maybe they're angry or exhausted or starving. And that's a trigger right there. If you're always on the lookout for the things that are going to set you off, you're going to miss out on the things that help keep you going.
Well, I think it's one of you guys said earlier about when people relapse, they look at all the things they did wrong, right? Instead of if there was an amount of time, however that was that they remained sober, what did they do right? What was different than the last time, right? And the lessons in that, and what do you need to include this time, this next time, I mean, I have,
For sure.
Kids in recovery, a few of them, and each one has been a different road, but now they've gone for a long time and they can recognize, what they needed to do to remain. It took several times and I'm very grateful for their recovery. And, but it wasn't, whether it was just marijuana, I'm not saying just, but let's say for one, it was marijuana. And then also having, let's say, he has some mental illness. The combination is, you're working on two things together. So his recovery is, it's very, AA works for him. He's a very spiritual guy. I have a daughter in recovery and that didn't work for her. There's other things that she has in life she's been sober for over 10 years. So finding that niche as well of sometimes the relapse can help you go into a direction of finding that community or group of sober people and what does work for you.
Absolutely. I think there's also something that we need to pay attention to is mental health, right? First and foremost, I personally look at, okay, well, what else is going on? What have you been covering up? What has been neglected? Because oftentimes addiction starts as an unhealthy coping skill.
Right.
And so what are we trying to cope from? What happened? What can't we tolerate?
As you're saying that, I mean, I just was thinking about how, okay, if we have poor connections growing up and, whether there was trauma or abuse or neglect, that also affects our chemical brain development and will inhibit the oxytocin and the serotonin and the dopamine release if we're not well cared for and loved.
And the combination of the two, of trauma,
Yeah.
Yep.
And often in the addiction treatment field, we have been kind of anti medications like SSRIs that help with dopamine and serotonin, and all of those neurotransmitters. And I think back to my early recovery days where I had tremendous anxiety, was getting tension headaches all the time. And if I had gotten Lexapro back then, how would my recovery process have been different, because of that chemical impact on the brain? It might have helped me heal faster. It took me 18 years in recovery before I started taking Lexapro. And then I went, oh, this is what I think normal people feel like. So that chemical process, and I don't know that that's so much a question, but like you're helping some of my neurons to connect, between mental health and addiction, and why it is such a double-edged sword to have both.
For sure. Sorry, I was reading this from Tom. Found that mental health seems to be the last thing on my clients' thing that my clients work on. Yeah, yeah, a lot of denial there. I don't have trauma. That wasn't traumatic. So I went to bed hungry every night. Sometimes I think you didn't even learn normal natural survival and connection from infant on. And you're going to look
I'll
for
be
it.
oh, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
I'll be honest. I didn't even really understand anything about mental health or anything during my whole addiction, anything. And I've lost several siblings to the same addiction, and I was always in denial. And it now it obviously it does it. I look back on it and I think, what was I denying? I was in that position, but um that was the last thing, that there wasn't as many places to go back when I was younger and when I was drinking and stuff like that. So now obviously we have all kind of treatment centers, and like you said about the Lexapro and stuff like that. That's one of the first things that I started taking. My doctor put me on after I went through treatment and stuff like that. So I never knew about regulating, myself and in my mental health. It was not an option back then.
I thank you for sharing that. I think that it definitely speaks to the power that mental health has, and also that there are other options available. Um, a lot of times when psychiatric medication is suggested, it is met with an absolutely not. I'm not crazy. That's what I usually get. I'm not ill. I'm not crazy. That's for crazy people. No one's saying you're crazy. We're saying that maybe something is off kilter and you need a little help to get that balance back, to be at a functional level, because the way you've been living is not functional. It's not manageable. I like what in the chat talking about pause, post-acute withdrawal syndrome.
But if you've been using, let's say, crack, right, or heroin, meth, the brain, that is a really normal response with I'm not crazy, but we know that what happens to the brain, that response from, and not, I don't want to put in all drugs, but specific drugs can really, there's a response with that I've heard, I mean, a lot. That's very common. And that's what I meant earlier. That takes a very long time when we're talking about using that drug use for a long period of time to get a response of even owning that there has like mental illness, right? I mean, that's it's very hard. That's where it becomes it's really sad. It's really hard.
Yeah, for
To
sure.
penetrate that.
Stimulant use is where we see the highest dopamine flooding. Any substance affects dopamine, but like methamphetamine specifically, I mean, there's a reason why we see people crash so hard when they stop. And why that pull, that chemical pull we were talking about earlier, is it's different. Yeah, MDMA for sure. It is. It does something different than someone who comes in addicted to alcohol. And again, thinking about different chemical properties, alcohol is a depressant. It doesn't do the same thing to your nervous system as a stimulant's going to do. So, I know I mainly talked about dopamine because that's the star of the show when we're talking about pleasure and reward, but other things are going on. And that's why, you know, Suboxone isn't going to treat someone with stimulant use disorder. Right? We have to pay attention to also those medication assisted treatments are different. It's not related to what we see as like addiction is addiction. Yeah, it is, but the substance matters in those cases. Yeah, I like that. Coordinating care is huge. So are we getting people referred to a psychiatrist? Are we getting people referred to things like case management? Because then we can also get into our basic needs being met. Wow. One tab of ecstasy took 7 years of dopamine to return.
That's crazy.
Sorry, I didn't write that very clearly, but that was a psych professor from Oakland his research is in addiction, and that's what he explained to us was just one time. So as we're teaching, I used to teach individuals, and again, it's not hopeless, but to teach how do we build that hope back up of why it will take time. This is why it will take time. We need to give ourselves patience because we did change our chemicals. So we have to give patience for those to come back.
Part of, I think, building that patience is practice of meditation and mindfulness and being present, because it deters from that instant gratification of needing to feel the flood right away. For sure. That's interesting. So how are we balancing treatment of these individuals? How are we not checking all the boxes, but looking at the complete full picture?
I think that's a really good question. I mean, it means we do meditation and we celebrate the little rewards and we have gratitude and we do case management to manage all those other stressors and we use medication and we include the family and it, it's hard to feel like we've done enough sometimes, even when we're going above and beyond and doing all the things. But yeah, I think that's a great question.
And I think that's something that's important to keep asking ourselves as we do our jobs of, am I covering the bases? Because it wasn't just one thing that landed our clients into the situation they're in now. So it's not going to be just one thing that gets them out of it. And it's also not that one size fits all approach. Some people's brains operate differently. Some people have the genetic component on top of it, right? It doesn't exist in a bubble. Yeah, the mind needs to heal.
And it's the co-occurring apart, right? Which we talked about when you were saying, because some people may, I mean, meditation is wonderful, but meditation can mean the meaning, if we could expand it, could mean a lot more for different people. And talking about both together, right? yes, they may come in for an SUD, but what does that, what else is going along with it? We said, so a lot of these things we can expand on, I think. And I love all this, the conversation with pause, but talking and explaining how long, it does take, and giving them that, some of those tools to recognize and elevate their, their worth, because that's what we're talking about here too, right? At the core of all of this is how people, they feel about themselves. So we can, I guess, keep thinking meditation, and I know how great it is, but what that can mean for each person. What is meditative for each person, right?
For sure.
Mhm.
I like
And
that.
yeah, and how can you, you know, introducing the medications when we talked about, if that's something someone's open to help them be able to reach that. Like you were saying, like I could have, if I had this as well at the time of my beginning of recovery, maybe I could have had been able to, get there in a way that wasn't so painful, even though it's all painful. So I'm not talking for anybody else, but just being able to have flexibility in that, where some people, we can offer that, of the thinking, more flexible thinking.
Absolutely. And I think a lot of this comes to stigma too. And that's why we talk about addiction in the brain. That's why I feel passionately about this, is I think understanding biological changes makes it more understandable in terms of like, how are people acting in this way and doing things that normal people wouldn't do. um yeah, I think continuing to educate not only ourselves but also our clients on what it is that they're facing can help alleviate that stigma. And ultimately, when we do that, we make treatment more accessible. Okay. Any questions? Anyone? Yes, I have a really good video I can share. Um, I can put it in the chat. If I can find it. Any other questions, comments, concerns, ideas about using this? Like I said, I want it to be conversational because I want people to actually get something about it, care about it, learn how to talk about it.
No, you did great.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I'll definitely send this video. It's helpful.
It's a great getting a refresher. I think it's so important for all of us, or I know it is for me.
Yeah, thank you very much. It helped my brain connect some of the dots about the brain. So thank you.
I appreciate everyone attending. I want to um, send that video if I can find it.
Say if you don't, I know sometimes when I'm looking for stuff, it doesn't pop up even though I want it to. So if you can't find it, we have some time. If you can't, you can always email it to me and I can email it out with the next day or two. But if not, during evaluations, if you can find it in the chat. But also those, if you don't have access to the chat, I'll still make sure I add that link to the email that will come tonight or tomorrow morning with the PowerPoint again.
Awesome. And yeah, I was going to say that all of the resources are at the final slide of the PowerPoint. And I believe that a couple of those had like videos with it. So you'll just have to click around and see. But I'll find the one that I found most helpful and share that out. Any other last questions, thoughts, comments, concerns?
It's lots of thank yous. Awesome. Well, thank you, everyone. We do have some times if you have, they have any other comments or questions that pop up, because sometimes with the brain, we're all processing, mulling it over as it's changing, and our thoughts are changing in our synapses that are happening right now with the information, and bringing in things that we knew and things that we've, I can say for myself, going through my master's program, I learned the same psychology theories for 7 years straight. And every year, you learn the same people for 7 years straight. It hit differently every single year. So I know learning about the brain does the same thing for us. We know this, but every time we learn it, something hits differently and it sinks in a little bit differently each time. So take the time to think about these things. There's lots of great jobs and great knowledge, and they enjoyed the training. So again, thank you so much, McKenna, and we can see your passion in this training and this topic helps set the foundation for many people to understand and really understand the disease model, and really help bring passion to the individuals that we serve daily, or family members that you might interact with, friends you might interact with, coworkers, colleagues, so on and so forth. And then there is a link in the chat, so I'll make sure I take that link as well and put it in the email. In the meantime, then, what you all are waiting for, I will get the link for you for the eval. So let me just get that for you. There we go. There is the link for the evaluation. Please take the time to fill out. If you are looking for the continuing education credits, it is 1.5 specific MCBAT for this topic. It is specific because it is directly related to substance use disorders and highlighted substance use disorders. Um, that is what you will receive today. Please keep in mind that I know some of the certificates have taken a little bit longer. I just want to keep in mind that we do say at least 10 business days for certificates. We have had some change in our training department, so it is taking, and lots of trainings occurring right now with new hires and things. So please just keep that in mind as we try to get certificates out. I do appreciate that when you tell me you don't receive them after 10 days, because it keeps it on my radar so I can make sure to reach out to our training team. I will resend the form, and I will send the form for evaluation in an email as well. It will be open until noon tomorrow. So I will send it out tonight to everyone who's been in attendance. That way, if you can't see the chat, it will pop up for you there. The last thing, though, I want to make sure that I share with you really quick here is upcoming trainings. So just bear with me really quick. There we go. I'm sharing my screen, so hopefully you all can see that. Is our calendar for FY25. I am so excited that we have almost every month full, starting from November until October of next year. There's only 2 months that we do not have workshops. December, just being with the holidays and things. I know lots of people take time off. Also, being in the field myself, I know we have a high intake of intakes during that time. So to try to make sure balance and things of that nature, I will be emailing out the schedule as well. So just wanted to show it to you. So our next one is January. It is again the second Thursday from 6:30 to 8 p.m. This is marijuana vaping prevention, what parents and caregivers need to know. So hopefully looking at the schedule, the things that you guys asked for, the list we got from you guys was amazing last summer. So we did our best to try to find many of those presentations. So you'll see those on there as well. Right now, the first January is the only one open. They're going to open up the trainings though up until March. Again, every time we have one of these workshops, I will send it out, and every month, if you are on my mailing list, I send it out to you as well. So you can continue to sign up as you know your schedules and things of that nature. Um, I had another thought. Oh, the website also has the whole list as well for you. So if you go to oaklandchn.org/activities, you will see the SUD community workshops, and the entire list is here along with the presenters and the objectives as well. And at the very bottom here, you will see which ones you can sign up for. Right now, we have January open as it is a couple months in advance. We're just trying to do a few months at a time as we have noticed. People might forget that they signed up or things of that nature, and there's multiple registration. So to make sure that we are trying to maybe to prevent some things like that. So we will be doing a couple of months at a time. And again, we always will be emailing these out to you. And I had a thought and now I am blanking on that last thought. So I will let you